I wanted to talk about a strategy I used on this little hillside that has really worked out pretty well. And there's some parts of the strategy that I think are quite transferable to many different contexts. Other parts maybe not so much, but so as a little bit of a background, it's kind of hard to see. Nothing ever looks the same on a camera as it does in real life, but this slope right here is really steep. It's probably like maybe 35 or 40 degrees from the shoulder right there down to there. I don't know. Yeah, it's not quite 45, obviously, but it's pretty darn steep. I mean, it's something where you can easily stumble and fall down. And this whole little landform was made by people who owned this property in the past, and the greenhouse was not there, but they had made this little garden, and so that's like a lot of fill. And so there's some garbage, and it's not the best quality fill. But when I got here, this spot was like all the way out to here. There were metal posts with barbed wire and snow, like plastic snow fence, all tangled in, completely overgrown with like poison ivy, multiflora rose, bittersweet. There were black locust. It was basically the thorniest, scrubbiest, most poisonous, overgrown fence mixed with wire. I mean, it was truly not the funnest thing I've ever done to get rid of all that stuff. So basically, I didn't know what to do with the whole scene for a couple years, and because it's hard to manage all those plants that are so vigorous to grow back. Oh, and then mugwort as the herbaceous layer was in there. So it's hard to know how to manage such a entourage. So once I finally got all the building materials out and was satisfied that way, I basically went through and truly ripped out all the roots of all those things that I could. Oh, and that included grapes as well. And they really can get in things and snare you up. So I didn't do it for a few years, but then I opted for a pretty heavy removal of all that stuff because I really just, it was very close to the house, and I just didn't want that stuff growing in such a nice flat area that they had made. So I got the fence out, and I grew on this little flat spot, which had clearly been the point of this thing. That was a garden. And I just grew whatever garden stuff there, strawberries and vegetables and whatnot. And then I put this little greenhouse up, and I never knew what to do with this hillside. The year and maybe 2 years after I cleared it, sumac took over, and on this kind of hillside with no competition, the sumac would grow 6 to 8 feet in a year, a dense thicket. And so remembering all those things, I can hardly believe what it looks like now, which is just an actual little peach orchard. And I'll come up and look from the top here so you can see how steep it feels. I don't know if that really comes through, but it's very steep. You can't walk down it, you know, sideways. Your ankle will roll over if you hit an uneven spot. So how did I get here? Well, after clearing as much of that vegetation as possible, I went for a really simple planting plan. In fact, I had gone down to visit my friends in southern Mexico, and I remembered from having been there many years ago, their entire land is steeper than this, or as steep as this. And they're indigenous folks, Zapotec, and they farm in a very, very old way, the milpa system of agriculture, and it's a polyculture that is so refined and so long-winded that I had no idea what I was looking at the first few times I saw it. But I figured, you know, just because this land is steep doesn't mean I can't do something productive with it. Their entire farm and everything they do is on land that's steeper than this. And so it was really inspiring, because I had sort of just left this to grow up, and then I would basically like scythe it down or weed whack it once or twice a year just to keep it from getting too crazy. So I went in and I decided, okay, let me plant something that's super fast growing and is gonna shade the ground. And then pretty much I decided to leave the space in between the trees with just herbaceous ground cover. That way I could go in and clear down to the ground a few times a year. And so these are the Siberian peaches. I had started these. This is gonna be their 4th year in the ground. I mean, it's hard to believe, but that is the truth. That's been in the ground for 3 seasons. And they're loaded. I think if things go well this year, next year maybe we'll have an unimaginably large number of seedlings. Who knows? But so the ground cover in between them, I was very tempted to put in more complexity and plant more stuff. And since the beginning, I sort of have done that a little bit. There's a little pawpaw here. This is actually a variety one for Scionwood, called Mango. But I knew what I was up against here. There's mugwort, goldenrod, there was sumac. Actually, right here, this was a, what is this thing's called? Ailanthus that took quite a few years to finally perish. Multiflora rose still hanging on a little bit. But it was critical in the first entire 3 seasons of the transition of this space to be able to come in here and know simplistically I have a stem there, 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 and there, and that in between, at a certain time of year, I can clear it to the ground. Because otherwise, what will end up happening is that vines will grow up, and you can basically lose the trees. Or maybe I would just have a little wisp of flowers at the top, and the bottom branches would be getting no sun because of mugwort or black locust sprouts or sumac or whatever. So I needed to be able to, on the steep hillside, I often actually use the scythe. So I needed to be able to come in and get the scythe right to the back of the tree and cut everything with nice big broad strokes. And if I had overplanted it, it would have been really challenging, and I would have spent a lot more time in management. And you know, this is a pattern that I saw in Mexico when they would plant a new area. In the first couple of years, either they plant annual crops so that they're in there to manage the annual crops in the way that they manage annual crops, which is fairly intensive, you know, weeding and cultivating and things like that. Or they plant it with more space and they manage the herbaceous layer by cutting it back twice a season, all the way to the ground. And for that, they use actually machetes and a little hook instead of a scythe, or sometimes they have a little weed whacker. And so that's what they do. Oddly, they don't have grasses where I go, and there's just no grasses. I was sort of shocked by that. But so their herbaceous ground cover, by getting cut back twice a year in a place where the growth, the growing season is the whole year long, is sufficient to get, you know, coffee plants established, bananas, mangoes, avocados, whatever. So I try to use that pattern, and since then I have been planting in certain things. Right down there's a big patch of mountain mint that has taken over. Well, actually I had plugs, and I put in 15 or 20 plugs over there, and it took over the hillside. And there is comfrey planted next to most of these. Yeah, pretty much next to every peach. And and the pawpaw. And then, oh, I also did mulch it one time. One application of heavy wood chip mulch, which is, you know, I think that was optional. It was pretty hard to do on this hill and very, almost dangerous at one point. I remember tipping the wheelbarrow and it almost grabbed me. And since then, since we've gotten more shade, oh, and there's some sweet Sicily as well. And this is a river locust, and there's aronia. So there's other things now that I'm able to come and pop in because the mugwort regrowth and the multiflora rose regrowth has really been slowed down with the shade from these peaches. So essentially, I think that on land that's steep and hard to manage, or potentially, depending on how much time you have, even nice land that's relatively easy to manage, it's a really good pattern to put in something super fast growing that's gonna close a canopy. Well, and actually, that idea of closing the canopy, here you can see these two peaches are just about touching, and you can see the ground is really not growing much. When I back up, you can see these peaches have space between them, and the ground has a lot more growing potential. There's a lot of mugwort here on a low simmer that's about to explode. And so I may have actually even had a peach here, but then it maybe got clipped by something. And I've put these much slower growing plants here, an apple, that's a Dunstan chestnut, and a pawpaw. And they're taking a lot longer to close the canopy. It's gonna be another couple years. So this area will eventually be as mute as that in terms of understory growth, but it's gonna take some time. But those could be established, some of them, the pawpaw certainly, in the shade of those other faster growing trees. And getting a close to or aiming towards a closed canopy seems so important if you're in areas where you're not gonna like till and start from a clean slate. So I'm starting here from perennial herbaceous, perennial woody competition that will absolutely choke out and kill all of the plants that I plant unless it's managed. So I have to be able to manage it simply, and you know, I didn't want to have to go in with the scythe and make strokes that were 1 foot long so that I would miss the 17 other species that I have in between the plants. So I really opted for a simpler system for a period of time. And then once these peaches start to, you know, I haven't really pruned these peaches, I haven't done much. I don't necessarily think that these are gonna be the forever holding pattern of this landscape. I might end up this year, probably, maybe today, who knows, putting in a bunch more stuff that will be the next successional part of this hillside. So anyway, what you'll find is often you'll put a lot of effort into something and you'll have a very difficult time changing the trajectory of that piece of land. In other words, if you were to walk away from that at any point, it would just revert to what it had been before. And sumac and mugwort here will just swallow up almost anything you can throw at them, unless you can really cut them back to the ground multiple times every season until your crop gets up into the canopy above them. So anyway, just wanted to share this because I was sort of looking and realizing what this hill used to be and what it's become and how massive the transformation is. And hopefully our family will be enjoying a lot of peaches, and then we'll have a lot more Siberian peaches to propagate from this.